Vancouver Island sits off the west coast of British Columbia, Canada. Far larger than most people picture when they hear the word island, roughly the size of Taiwan or the Netherlands. On its southern tip sits Victoria, the provincial capital, a city known for its English-style gardens and quaint colonial architecture. In the 1990s, the western suburbs of Victoria told a different story than the postcards. Working-class neighborhoods with a crime rate above the national average, and a disproportionate number of young offenders, many coming from troubled or fractured homes. In the suburb of Saanich lived the Virk family. Manjit Virk was a first-generation immigrant from India, raised in the Sikh faith. His wife Suman was Indian as well, but born and raised in Victoria, in the Jehovah's Witness faith. Suman's family had wanted her to have an arranged marriage. She fell in love with Manjit instead and married him. Their household blended traditions, North American and South Asian, Sikh influence and Jehovah's Witness faith, and stood out even within their own broader South Asian community, which was predominantly Sikh. Reena Virk was born on March 10, 1983, the eldest of their 3 children. As a little girl, she was outgoing, social, full of energy, with dark curly hair and a wide smile. She loved animals. She loved other kids. Her father doted on her. As Reena entered her teenage years, the ordinary discomforts of adolescence collided with something sharper. She and her siblings, raised in a mostly white area, stood out for their South Asian background. Reena went through the self-consciousness that most teenagers experience about their changing bodies and appearance. And several girls at her school zeroed in on those insecurities with particular cruelty. At home, it weighed on her heavily. In public, she put on a braver face. By 14, in an effort to fit in, Reena began wearing the baggy jeans, bandanas, and oversized t-shirts that made up the gangster-inspired fashion popular among teens in 1997. She also began chafing against her parents' rules. A 9 p.m. curfew felt suffocating. She wanted to be out with the kids who hung around the local park, many of whom lived in foster care or were effectively homeless and had none of the restrictions Reena lived under. What followed was the kind of escalating cycle that's painfully familiar to anyone who has dealt with a teenager pushing against boundaries. Reena ran away after her first grounding. Her parents responded with tighter restrictions. She responded by formulating a plan to get out entirely. She reported abuse at home, which placed her temporarily in her grandparents' care. Then, while still living with her grandparents, she reported that her father had sexually abused her and made a suicide attempt during the same period. She was placed in foster care. The allegations against her father were never substantiated. The Crown ultimately determined there was insufficient evidence to proceed, and the charges were stayed. Living in foster care turned out not to be the freedom Reena had imagined. By September 1997, she had recanted the allegations against her father and asked to come home. Her relieved parents took her back immediately. But the same friction resurfaced within weeks. And by October, she had moved into a youth shelter and then a new foster placement. Through other kids in the foster system, she learned about group homes, the next tier up, with even fewer rules and curfews. She maneuvered her way into one, started skipping school, and began spending her time with a crowd that drank, smoked, and committed minor vandalism. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she was making progress toward belonging somewhere. Friday, November 14th, 1997. A chilly night under a full moon and a clear sky. Reena was invited to a party. A couple of younger girls, were 14 and 15 years old, told her to meet them in the parking lot of a local Walmart. From there, the group made its way to the back field of Shoreline Secondary School, where a much larger crowd was already gathering. By nightfall, roughly 30 teenagers were drinking, smoking, and generally getting rowdy in the open field behind the school. Around 8:30 p.m., someone threw a rock through a school window. A janitor called the police, and when officers arrived to break up the gathering, the teenagers scattered in every direction. To a nearby convenience store, to a comfort inn, to a schoolhouse, and to a secluded spot beneath the nearby Craigflower Bridge, which spans a tidal inlet called the Gorge Waterway. Reena ended up at the convenience store. From there, she called her parents and told them she'd decided to come home for the night instead of returning to the group home. Her actual house was closer, and she said she'd be there in about 20 minutes. Manjit and Suman were relieved. They waited. But before Reena could leave, two girls linked arms with hers and told her they were heading down to the bridge for one more cigarette. Pleased to be included, she went with them. By midnight, Reena's parents were anxious. She hadn't shown up. They called the group home to see if she'd gone there instead. No one had seen her since the previous night. Although missing a curfew wasn't unprecedented for Reena, the group home alerted police as a precaution. The reality of the situation in the area at that time was stark. Local police could field as many as 15 reports of missing children on any given night, almost all of them wards of the state, who would resurface the next day only to go missing again the night after. It was, as one officer described it, a cycle. Reena's late report didn't trigger any special alarm initially. But for Manjit and Suman, this wasn't routine. They waited by the phone through the night. By the following morning, in desperation, Suman called the Saanich police only to be told that a 48-hour waiting period applied before any formal action could be taken. The Virks spent those 48 hours combing through an address book they found in Reena's room and calling every number in it. One friend said Reena had never shown up at the Walmart meeting point. Another said she'd seen Reena around the bridge. By Monday morning, rumors had begun circulating through Shoreline School about an assault that had taken place under the bridge that Friday night. Reena Virk's name was attached to those rumors as the victim. One girl was overheard bragging that she had been responsible and implying Reena might never be coming back to class. The rumors reached parents and guardians who reported them to police. The 48-hour waiting period had long since passed. Investigators began interviewing students from both the school and the group home, but the teenagers were tight-lipped. No names, only secondhand fragments. All anyone could confirm was that Reena hadn't been seen since Friday night. 4 days after the initial assault, police got their first solid lead, not a rumor this time, but first-hand information from a resident of another group home. A girl there had been openly boasting about a brutal, premeditated attack on Reena. According to this informant, the assault hadn't been spontaneous. It had been planned for days. Specific people had been called and invited to meet under the bridge specifically to take part. Others had heard about it and asked to join in, wanting payback for things Reena had supposedly said or done. With this new information, police reclassified the case from missing person to active criminal investigation. A search of the area under the bridge began. One bank was accessible and was searched without result. The other was overgrown with reeds rising out of the water, so impossible to search by foot. It would need to be searched from the water, in the water, or from the air. A canvass of the neighborhood produced little. But police eventually located a girl who had directly participated in the assault, and she gave them a detailed, first-hand account. According to her, Reena had gone under the Craigflower Bridge with two girls she believed were her friends. About 20 teenagers were already waiting there, forming a loose semicircle around her. They accused her of flirting with one girl's boyfriend and bragging about it. They accused her of stealing a phone number book and calling boys from it. They wanted to settle the score. The attack began with a girl named Nicole Cook, extinguishing a lit cigarette directly on Reena's forehead. 7 others joined in. In total, 7 girls and 1 boy began punching, kicking, and striking Reena while she tried to defend herself, crying out for them to leave her alone. At one point, one of the onlookers stepped in and told the group that was enough, that anyone who wanted to continue would have to go through her first. That intervention seemed to diffuse the situation. The group lingered briefly and then dispersed, most of them with enough time to make it home before their own curfews. The informant gave police a full list of everyone involved. Most names were already known to local law enforcement through prior contact. One name stood out for a different reason entirely: Kelly Marie Ellard. One of the responding RCMP officers, Krista Hobday, was stunned. Her family had known Kelly's family socially for years. They attended events together. Krista had known Kelly since she was 9 years old. The Kelly she knew was, as far as she understood, a fairly ordinary teenager from a middle-class neighborhood. Seeing her name on a list connected to a brutal assault was difficult to reconcile. But the priority remained finding Reena. With a concrete list of names in hand, police coordinated a simultaneous roundup of every teenager involved, bringing them in for separate interviews at the same time to prevent them from coordinating their stories. The station became chaotic. Teenagers crying, protesting innocence, parents arriving in distress. But amid the confusion, a consistent core narrative emerged. According to the account that emerged from these interviews, after the initial group assault, Reena had been left alone under the bridge, crying in the mud, with a bloody nose and swollen eyes. After several minutes, she found the strength to climb back up to the bridge and began walking toward her parents' house. She wasn't alone for long. 2 of the original group had stayed behind and followed her. Kelly Ellard, 15 years old, and Warren Glowatsky, 16, the only male present at the original assault. Neither of them had known Reena personally before that night. Kelly Ellard was born August 9th, 1982. She was Caucasian, attractive in a conventional way, with dark brown hair. According to her grandmother, she had been deeply affected by her parents' divorce at age 8. Her mother remarried a respected soccer coach who had played for Canada in the World Cup. By most accounts, Kelly's household was middle class and reasonably stable. Her mother said she never missed curfew. Her grandmother described her as someone who loved animals and poetry. But this surface picture concealed a documented history of disturbing behavior. Kelly had been suspended twice from school, once for drinking alcohol in a bathroom, once for property damage. 3 months before the attack on Reena, in August 1997, she and several other girls had lured another girl to a remote location, beaten her, and attempted to set her hair on fire. Kelly was never charged in that incident, though others were. She had also been caught holding a knife to a classmate's throat. School records described her as disruptive, truant, and prone to violence. Some who knew her used the word sociopathic. Warren Glowatsky was born April 26, 1981, in Medicine Hat, Alberta. He was small, slight, with dark brown hair and a youthful face. His parents had stayed together largely for his sake, moving frequently across provinces. His mother struggled with alcoholism. His father left her in 1996 when Warren was 15 and took Warren with him to Nanaimo on Vancouver Island, eventually settling in a trailer home in Saanich. Warren had become involved with gangster rap culture and had affiliated himself with a local Crips-associated group, undergoing an initiation beating to join in 1996. He wore the group's colors openly at school. In the summer of 1997, just months before Reena's murder, Warren's father remarried and announced he was relocating to Southern California. He invited Warren to come with him. Warren declined. He didn't want to leave his girlfriend, Cyrita Hartley, and stayed behind alone in the trailer, supported by periodic checks from his father and meals and laundry help from his girlfriend's mother. Sarita had actually been among the first to gather under the bridge that night, but she felt unwell and left before the assault took place. Warren offered to walk her home. She declined, a decision she would later say she deeply regretted. According to the account given to police, Kelly and Warren had followed Reena after the initial assault specifically to make sure she wouldn't report anyone. When they caught up to her, she told them through tears to leave her alone. They grabbed her hands and said they were walking her home. Instead, they dragged her to the opposite side of the bridge onto a grassy patch and demanded she remove her jacket. The physical assault resumed. Reena fell. They picked her up and struck her head against a tree, knocking her unconscious. They dragged her toward the water, her clothing slipping as they moved her. At the water's edge, Kelly Ellard held Reena's head under the surface with her foot. While doing this, according to multiple witnesses who said Kelly had openly bragged about it afterward, she lit a cigarette and smoked it in its entirety while keeping Reena's head submerged. This detail, confirmed through Kelly's own boasting to multiple people, not through any reluctant confession, shocked even experienced officers. Police now had a homicide investigation and a missing body. A witness later told police she had returned to the scene the following morning with Kelly to dispose of the jacket and shoes Reena had left behind. Every witness except one believed Reena's body was somewhere in the gorge waterway. When Kelly Ellard was brought in for questioning, the interview ran more than 2 hours. While waiting for it to begin with her head resting in her mother's lap, Kelly was overheard correcting an officer who said Reena's name aloud. "I thought her name was Trina," she said, and yawned. During questioning, she expressed disbelief at being treated as a suspect, telling Sergeant Ross Polton, "I'm a girl. I never thought girls get arrested for murder. It's not very ladylike." He replied that she didn't strike him as someone particularly concerned with being ladylike. She told him, "This is Victoria. Nobody gets murdered in Victoria." She admitted to throwing the first punch during the initial group assault, but denied any involvement in Reena's death, suggesting instead that Reena had been abducted afterward by someone else entirely. When the sergeant stepped out of the room, she turned to her mother and demanded to be taken home, telling her, "You own me. You're my mother. You can say I want to take her home." On November 22nd, 1997, the 6 girls involved in the original group assault were charged with assault causing bodily harm. Because they were minors, their identities were initially protected. Several, including Nicole Cook, the girl who first burned Reena's forehead with a cigarette, later chose to identify themselves publicly through documentaries and media interviews. Kelly Ellard and Warren Glowatsky were charged separately with second-degree murder. Given the severity of the crime, the Crown successfully applied to have both of them moved from youth court into adult court, stripping away the privacy protections that would normally apply to minors. While the 8 teenagers were in custody, police turned their full attention to locating Reena's body. It didn't take long. 8 days after the initial assault, a special police dive team was dispatched to the waterway beneath the bridge. Simultaneously, an aerial search was conducted. Within roughly 15 minutes of flying the route along the gorge and over the bridge, the helicopter crew spotted something in the water about 200 meters past the bridge. Ground teams and the dive unit were dispatched immediately. They recovered Reena's body with as much care and dignity as the circumstances allowed. Her pants had been pulled down. Her shoes were missing. By this point, media had noticed the activity and gathered on the opposite shore, watching the recovery unfold from a distance. 2 officers were dispatched immediately to inform Manjit and Suman Virk that their daughter's body had been found. While awaiting the autopsy results, police executed a search warrant on the Ellard family home. In the laundry room closet, they found a black jacket, later positively identified as the one Reena had been wearing the night she was killed. As the investigation widened, witnesses described Kelly Ellard's behavior in the hours and days after the murder. She had reportedly run into a group of acquaintances on the far side of the bridge that same night, soaking wet, and told them outright that she had killed Reena. She approached a stranger on the street, asked for a cigarette, and told him the same thing. She brought multiple people back to the crime scene for what amounted to guided tours, pointing out exactly where and how the killing had happened, while warning them not to tell anyone. Within her social circle, she earned a new nickname, Killer Kelly. Warren Glowatsky, meanwhile, told a different and shifting story. In the days following the murder, he claimed he'd gotten into a fight with an indigenous man who had insulted Kelly, a fabricated explanation for the blood and dirt on his clothes. He later admitted the lie to one friend he thought might be sympathetic, given that the friend had recently had his own conflict with members of the South Asian community. The community's reaction to the murder was immediate and intense. Flowers and tributes accumulated at the bridge. Police held multiple press conferences daily as the public struggled to process a level of violence that felt entirely unfamiliar to the city. The autopsy findings were severe. Reena had sustained between 12 and 18 blows to her head and face. Bruising covered her entire skull, forehead, cheeks, and the back of her head, including a pattern consistent with the sole of a running shoe. Her brain showed swelling from the beating. She had sustained internal injuries comparable in severity to those seen in serious car accidents. A crushed small bowel, bruised pelvis, stomach, liver, and pancreas. Pebbles found lodged in her throat were consistent with drowning while face down in shallow water. The pathologist's conclusion was precise and devastating. While drowning was the official cause of death, Reena likely would not have survived the second assault by Kelly Ellard and Warren Glowatsky regardless. In February 1998, in youth court, the 6 girls convicted of assault causing bodily harm received sentences ranging from 60 days to 1 year in youth custody. In April 1999, Warren Glowatsky went to trial in adult court, with the presiding judge ruling against a publication ban. He pleaded not guilty, acknowledging that he had taken part in the assault and helped drag Reena toward the water, but insisting he had no idea Kelly intended to kill her. In June 1999, he was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison, with no parole eligibility for at least 7 years, the maximum allowed under his sentencing terms. Justice Malcolm McCauley noted that Warren would have a better opportunity for rehabilitation through education and programming at a medium-security federal facility than he would in a youth institution. Warren appealed his conviction in 2001 and lost. The BC Court of Appeal upheld the finding that he had actively participated in Reena's murder. While in prison, Warren learned he had Métis heritage, one of Canada's recognized Indigenous peoples alongside First Nations and Inuit groups. He also began participating in a restorative justice program with Reena's parents, a framework within the Canadian correction system focused on repairing harm and supporting rehabilitation, rather than purely punitive outcomes. Manjit and Suman Virk chose to participate willingly, and over time developed an ongoing relationship with Warren, who apologized to them directly and repeatedly. In November 2004, at age 23, Warren applied for parole. He told the board that discovering his Métis heritage and confronting the harm he'd caused had genuinely changed him. The board denied the request, determining he wasn't quite ready. Reena's parents did not object to the application. In July 2006, at 25, Warren applied for unescorted temporary absences. He described himself to the panel as someone who now understood his own dangerous impulsivity and could recognize his triggers. Manjit and Suman spoke at the hearing in his support. The panel approved the request, citing his strong record in custody. At the end of the hearing, Warren thanked the panel members individually, embracing each of them. In June 2007, at 26, he applied for day parole, a step that allows participation in community-based activities. He invited an indigenous elder to perform a traditional smudging ceremony at the start of the hearing. He told the board, through tears, "My thoughts back then were about being powerful. I call it bravado, or trying to be a gangster. I was screaming out for attention in all the wrong places, and I got it." He said meeting Reena's parents had affected him more than anything else in the process. He described watching Kelly hold Reena's head underwater and said, "I feel ashamed. I wish I could crawl under a rock." The board deliberated for only 25 minutes before granting day parole. Manjit hugged Warren tightly. Suman shook his hand. She told reporters afterward, "We would have hoped that somebody would have learned something from this whole thing, and so far it looks like Warren has done that. Out of all the accused in this whole process, he's the only one who has." In June 2010, nearly 13 years after the murder, at 29, Warren applied for full parole. He told the board what he had done was a cowardly act. "I hated myself. I think that night I turned that hate outward." He showed visible emotion describing a conversation with Reena's father, who had told him that if it had been his own child, he would have been seething with anger, but instead told Warren to go out and do good with his life so that there could be some meaning drawn from his daughter's death. Warren was granted full parole that day. He has not been mentioned in the media in any meaningful way since. What he is doing now is not publicly known. While in custody at a Vancouver Island youth facility shortly after her arrest, Kelly was overheard saying, "Until I'm sentenced, I'm going to be good, because I have to. After that, I'm just going to go psycho in here, like in the dining room or something. Because there's guys in here I'd like to punch out, and girls too. They're trying to say it was all me, and that's bull. As far as I'm concerned, I'm not guilty. I have nothing to do with it. But I'm trying not to get into fights, because then they'll think she murdered this girl." Her lawyers attempted to have her case heard in youth court, but the Supreme Court of Canada declined to intervene, leaving her in adult court without publication protections. Her second-degree murder trial opened in Vancouver in March 2000. She was now 17 and pleaded not guilty. The prosecution portrayed her as the most aggressive member of the original group. More than 10 teenagers testified that Kelly had appeared happy and proud of what she'd done. The defense countered by framing her as the scapegoat of a conspiracy among the other girls to protect themselves, suggesting the actual killer was likely one of the 6 already sentenced girls, identified only by the initials MPG. They claimed Kelly had gone home and to bed after the initial assault, and had been falsely implicated afterward. Warren Glowatsky was brought to court twice to testify, but refused both times, citing concerns about jeopardizing his own appeal and a deep aversion to being perceived as an informant within the prison system. He was found in contempt of court. His lawyer defended the refusal as protected under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, pointing out that the Crown had previously argued Warren's own account of events should be disregarded at his trial, making it inconsistent to now treat his testimony as reliable. Kelly chose to testify in her own defense over 3 days. Witnesses described her voice during testimony as soft and girlish, compared by some to a young child's voice. Her demeanor shifted between distress and apparent disbelief that she was facing these charges at all. She denied crossing the bridge with Warren, claiming instead that he and 2 other girls had done so and committed the killing without her. She cried in the witness box as the Crown's questioning intensified, and at points showed visible frustration, telling prosecutors to stop repeating questions and move forward. After 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict: guilty. Kelly sobbed quietly. Reena's grandmother crossed the courtroom to comfort Kelly's mother, Susan, wrapping an arm around her. Kelly was let out of the courtroom before she had the chance to say goodbye to her parents. The judge set her minimum sentence before parole eligibility at 5 years, the minimum allowed, in contrast to Warren's maximum of 7. In her written judgment, Justice Nancy Morrison stated that Kelly had never been violent, had no history of violence before or after this event, and maintained an overwhelming love of animals. That characterization would not hold up, not before the trial, and certainly not after. In November 2000, it was announced that Reena's parents were suing the teenagers arrested in connection with the attack. Manjit Virk said, "Society doesn't make people take responsibility for their actions. This is one way to make them responsible." The Virks also sued the Greater Victoria School District, alleging that teachers had known about the violent behavior patterns of several students involved in the assault. The outcome of this civil action does not appear to be publicly documented. In April 2001, a prison incident report noted that Kelly had admitted to orchestrating a fight in which 2 female inmates were assaulted by 4 others. In February 2003, nearly 3 years after her conviction, the BC Court of Appeal ordered a new trial for Kelly, then 21. The court found that the Crown's cross-examination had been improper, specifically criticizing prosecutors for asking her variations of the question, "What reason would these people have to frame you?" A question repeated 18 separate times, which the appeal court found undermined the presumption of innocence. The ruling stated plainly that the community's revulsion toward the crime made it especially important for the Crown to ensure a scrupulously fair trial. Kelly was released on bail, pending her new trial. In March 2004, that bail was revoked after she was charged with assault, causing bodily harm in connection with the beating of a 58-year-old woman in a Vancouver park. According to police, Kelly and a companion had been drinking in the park, invited the older woman to join them, and then accused her of stealing a missing cell phone, beating her severely enough that she broke free and called emergency services. Kelly was returned to custody. Kelly's second trial began in June 2004. This time, the Crown proceeded with significant caution given the previous appeal ruling. Over 5 days, several witnesses testified that Kelly had personally admitted to killing Reena, including Warren Glowatsky, who had reversed his earlier refusal to testify and stated again that he had personally witnessed Kelly drown her. The defense attacked his credibility, pointing to his documented history of inconsistent statements both to police and during his own trial. Kelly testified again. Her demeanor this time was described as disrespectful, angry, and unremorseful. She admitted to punching Reena but claimed it was only because she believed Reena was about to harm one of her friends. She denied drowning her. By her 3rd day on the stand, visibly frustrated with the Crown's persistent questioning, she said, "I'm obviously going to be convicted. My life is over. You got what you wanted. I'm going to be convicted." After nearly 5 days of deliberation, the jury sent a note to the judge stating they were deadlocked. All things must come to an end. That time is now. 11 jurors had reached agreement, 1 had not. The judge declared a mistrial. Throughout this period, Kelly's conduct in custody continued to draw concerning reports. She complained of anxiety related to the high-profile nature of her case and used it to secure additional privileges, including refusing to share a cell during trial proceedings on the grounds that she didn't want a stranger near sensitive court materials. She demanded another inmate be relocated, describing her as having a, quote, horribly flawed personality and threatened to assault her when the request wasn't granted. One prison staffer's incident report from May 2004 described her as intelligent, but, quote, very comfortable with violence as a solution to problems. In August 2004, traces of cocaine were found on paper in her cell, resulting in a week of segregation. In February 2005, 7 years after the murder, with Kelly now 22, her third trial began. This time she did not testify. Her defense focused on attacking the reliability of key Crown witnesses, arguing that several had developed new memories over time, seemingly shaped by repeated prompting from police and prosecutors. The jury deliberated for 5 days. This time they reached a verdict: guilty. Kelly showed no visible emotion. Reena's mother, Suman, told reporters with tears in her eyes, "There is no victory here today. There are no winners. We are all losers." In July 2005, Kelly Ellard was sentenced to life in prison, this time with the maximum 7-year parole ineligibility period. The judge described Reena's death as a senseless and remorseless crime. But even this conviction was not the end. In September 2008, the BC Court of Appeal, responding to a complaint from Kelly's defense, overturned the second-degree murder conviction and ordered yet another trial, the fourth. The basis: a witness who, during the third trial, testified to seeing Reena cross the bridge followed shortly after by Kelly and Warren, a detail not included in her original statement to police 10 days after the murder. The appeal court concluded the trial judge should have specifically instructed the jury to weigh that inconsistency. The ruling was not unanimous. One of the 3 appellate judges disagreed, finding the absence of that instruction unlikely to have affected the jury's reasoning. Ordinarily, a split appellate decision triggers an automatic further appeal to the Supreme Court of Canada. In an unusual legal maneuver, Kelly's defense actually petitioned to prevent the Supreme Court from hearing that automatic appeal, wanting the fourth trial to simply proceed without further delay. The Supreme Court rejected this petition but did ultimately agree to hear the case. While this was pending, Kelly applied again for bail. In March 2009, the BC Court of Appeal denied it. Meanwhile, the Crown took the opposite position from Kelly's defense, arguing the missing jury instruction had been inconsequential and that the conviction should simply be reinstated without another trial. In June 2009, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled 8-1 to reinstate Kelly's second-degree murder conviction, finding that the missing jury instruction, while technically an error, was ultimately harmless to the outcome. Manjit Virk, reflecting on the 11 years the case had consumed, said, 35 jurors have convicted her, and the defense just keeps beating the system, and the system allowed it. He questioned whether it was worth dragging a case out that long at such cost to everyone's lives and to taxpayers, while saying he held no personal malice toward Kelly and hoped she would eventually get the help she needed. Over subsequent years, as Kelly became eligible to apply for full parole, she waived that right 4 separate times. In May 2016, 19 years after the murder, 33-year-old Kelly attended her first hearing for day parole. Ahead of the hearing, Reena's grandfather said the family no longer believed she could redeem herself. If she had admitted her role and if she had told the truth, then it would have been much better for our conscience, our pain, our satisfaction. At this hearing, for the first time, Kelly acknowledged details she had previously omitted from her testimony, admitting that had she not participated, Reena would likely still be alive. When asked directly who was responsible for Reena's death, she said, "I believe I am." She continued to deny holding Reena's head under the water, stating Reena was already unconscious and there would have been no purpose in doing so. The board ultimately denied the application, with one member noting that while she had made progress accepting responsibility, her account still didn't match the established facts of her conviction, and that her presentation came across as, quote, very entitled, strategic rather than sincere. Around this same period, Kelly had begun a pen-pal relationship with a male inmate at a neighboring facility named Darwin Dorazan, who was serving a 10-year sentence for multiple break-and-enter convictions connected to a heroin addiction. Federal inmates in Canada are entitled to private family visits under specific conditions. Extended visits of up to 72 hours conducted in separate facilities on prison grounds intended to support rehabilitation and reintegration. Kelly was approved for these visits with Darwin while he was on day parole. In October 2016, it was revealed that Kelly, then 34, was 8 months pregnant, with Darwin as the father. Under Canada's mother-child residential program, infants are permitted to remain with an incarcerated mother. Kelly's lawyer stated publicly that she had not become pregnant strategically and had been reflecting deeply on the Virk family and on what it meant to bring a new life into the world. The following month, Darwin's parole was revoked after corrections officials learned he was a person of interest in the disappearance of a low-level drug dealer earlier that year. With him back in custody, the two were barred from further private visits under standard policy. In January 2017, now a new mother, Kelly applied for unescorted releases, up to 5 outings per month, 4 hours each, accompanied by a trained escort. She told the board that having her son was, quote, the best therapy I could have asked for, and that she now saw the world differently. The board was initially unable to reach a decision and rescheduled. At the rescheduled February hearing, board members raised concerns about her relationship with Darwin, now back in custody. Kelly maintained the two had an agreement to support each other in staying away from crime. When again asked about Reena's death, she repeated her denial of holding Reena under the water, again citing Reena's unconsciousness as making it unnecessary. She also said, I don't feel like sorry is good enough. Their life has been completely ruined. I wish there was something I could do to make it better. The board ultimately approved limited unescorted releases for medical appointments and parenting programs. Reena's mother, Suman, speaking to CTV News afterward, expressed her frustration plainly. She had no formal say in the process. The power rested entirely with the parole board, and as a victim's family member, she felt completely without agency. Kelly Ellard was granted full-day parole in November 2017. In October 2018, parole records revealed she had legally changed her name to Carrie Marie Sim. In August 2019, her day parole was extended to include overnight stays in the community. In May 2022, then 39, she waived her right to a parole hearing, indicating she did not yet feel prepared to fully return to society, though by law, the board was still required to assess her eligibility and determined she remained unsuitable for anything beyond continued day parole. Through the years that followed, her record on day parole was inconsistent. She tested positive for codeine at one point. She was involved in a domestic violence incident. In 2021, parole documentation noted a deterioration in her behavior significant enough to prompt arrest and a return to custody. By 2023, she was living at a residential facility in the Lower Mainland, and staff there described her conduct as antagonizing, threatening, and insulting. A risk assessment conducted that year found her to be at moderate to high moderate risk of future violence over the longer term, with that risk specifically elevated by substance use or association with others who used substances. In April 2024, Hulu released a television series titled Under the Bridge, based on the best-selling 2005 book of the same name by the late Canadian author Rebecca Godfrey, starring Lily Gladstone. The series brought renewed international attention to the case. That same month, a parole board decision specifically noted Carrie Sims' reaction to the show's release as a factor in her continued evaluation, alongside an extension of her day parole for another 6 months. Around this same period, it was revealed she had given birth to a second child while on day parole. In January 2025, Carrie Sim, formerly Kelly Ellard, was arrested in South Surrey, British Columbia for breaching her parole conditions. The specific nature of the breach was not publicly disclosed, though her standing conditions had included staying away from alcohol and drugs, avoiding contact with anyone involved in criminal activity, and having no direct or indirect contact with any member of the Virk family. According to subsequent parole documentation, she had tested positive for methamphetamine the previous January, following months described as negative and non-compliant. She was found at a residential facility refusing to leave her room, making what officials termed vague suicidal comments, and was ultimately taken into custody after a struggle with staff. Documentation noted she had been managing significant personal stress, including her child's behavioral challenges and an ongoing custody dispute with her former partner. She remains, as of the most recent available records, the mother of 2 young children, navigating a parole status that has continued for years without ever fully resolving into either full freedom or full revocation. Whether she will ultimately be granted full parole, returned permanently to custody, or remain in this extended limbo is not yet known. This case did not stay contained within courtrooms and parole hearings. It became a touchstone for how an entire country thought about youth violence, race, and gender for years afterward. The dominant media narrative, shaped significantly by Rebecca Godfrey's best-selling book Under the Bridge, framed the crime primarily through the lens of bullying and a perceived rise in violence among teenage girls in Canadian society. Kelly Ellard was frequently portrayed as a fundamentally good girl from a stable middle-class home who had fallen in with a bad influence, in the book's account partly attributed to a boyfriend who styled himself an, quote, Asian gangster. Reena, by contrast, was often characterized through the frame of a rebellious teenager who had lied to and disobeyed her parents. This good girl, bad girl framing fueled significant public anxiety about a perceived decline in traditional values and calls to reform the Young Offenders Act. At the same time, the case generated extensive and very different analysis within academic, South Asian, and feminist circles. A book titled Reena Virk, Critical Perspectives on a Canadian Murder, edited by Mithili Rajiva and Sheila Bhattacharya, argued the case was fundamentally about systemic racism rather than girl-on-girl bullying, describing it in some analyses as comparable to a lynching. These critics pointed to Reena's status as an outsider within an outsider community, South Asian, Jehovah's Witness, in a predominantly white area, and questioned why Kelly Ellard alone, among everyone connected to the case, was afforded 3 separate trials, a degree of legal latitude no other convicted killer in Canada had received. They also questioned the disparity between her original minimum sentence and Warren Glowatsky's maximum. In response, other commentators and academics pointed out that 2 of the original girls charged in the initial assault were themselves young women of color, complicating a purely racial framing of events. Reena's parents, for their part, embraced the bullying prevention angle as the most productive use of their daughter's story. They spoke at schools across the region about the dangers of bullying, and in 2009 produced an educational DVD titled The Reena Virk Story, featuring conversations with communities, educators, and students, including an interview with Warren Glowatsky. Multiple versions were produced for different age groups, accompanied by discussion guides for classroom use. The case continued to generate cultural and academic output for years. Plays, award-winning poetry, multiple doctoral theses, classroom debates across the country. In 2010, it was announced that Reese Witherspoon's production company had acquired the rights to Under the Bridge, with plans for a feature film in partnership with Canadian production companies, targeting a 2012 release. That particular film adaptation never materialized publicly, though, as noted, the story eventually reached screens in 2024 in the form of the Hulu limited series. She was 14 years old. She loved animals. She wanted more than almost anything to belong somewhere, to find a group of people who would simply let her be one of them without scrutiny or cruelty. She called her parents that night to say she was coming home. She never made it. What happened to Reena Virk under that bridge has been described, depending on who is telling the story, as an act of teenage bullying gone catastrophically too far, as a manifestation of deep-seated racism in a community that never fully accepted her, or as some combination neither framework alone can fully capture. What is certain is this: a 14-year-old girl who simply wanted to be included was beaten by a crowd of her peers, left bleeding in the mud, and then followed, beaten again, and drowned by two of the people who had been part of that crowd. Manjit and Suman Virk turned their unimaginable grief into advocacy. Speaking in schools, producing educational material, participating in a restorative justice process with one of their daughter's killers, in the hope that something resembling meaning could be drawn from what happened to her. Reena Virk deserves to be remembered as more than the headline her death became. She was a teenage girl who loved animals, who wanted friends, who called home that Friday night to say she was coming back. She just never got the chance.